The old man fought his way through the downpour, boots sinking in the mud, a lantern trembling in his hand. The wind screamed through Bitterroot Valley like a wounded thing. Rain slashed sideways across the timberline, and the creek that usually whispered behind Elias Hartman's cabin had turned into a roaring beast of brown water and debris. Somewhere in that chaos, a sound cut through. Not thunder, not the cracking pines, but the desperate, high-pitched cry of something alive. He froze. Then he saw it. A small, gray form clinging to a half-submerged log in the raging current. A wolf pup, eyes wide with terror, about to be swallowed whole by the flood. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Elias dropped the lantern into the mud and waded into the torrent without thinking. The cold was instant, slicing through his bones like glass. The current tore at his legs, pulling him toward the rocks downstream. He cursed under his breath and lunged again. The memory of another night, another storm, flashing in his mind. The landslide that had buried his wife and son 15 years ago. He had failed to save them. He would not fail this creature. Ranger, his old bloodhound, barked wildly from the bank, pacing, whining, as the man stumbled and fought against the pull of the flood. "Stay back, boy!" Elias shouted through the roar, his voice barely audible over the water. The pup cried out once more, claws scraping wood, and Elias finally reached the log. His fingers closed around slick fur. With a grunt of effort, he yanked the pup free, tucking the shivering body under his coat. The current caught him again, sweeping him off balance. He hit a rock hard enough to feel the air rush from his lungs, but somehow, by blind instinct, he clawed toward the bank where Ranger waited. The hound barked louder, pulling at Elias's coat as he crawled up through the reeds. The two collapsed together on the mud, drenched, gasping. The pup whimpered in his arms, tiny, ribs showing. Its heartbeat fluttered like a bird trapped in a cage. Elias rose, shaking, and stumbled toward the cabin through the storm. Inside, the fire was nearly out. He threw on more wood and knelt by the hearth, wrapping the pup in an old wool blanket. Steam rose from their soaked clothes. The storm raged outside, beating against the windows. Elias sat back on his heels, staring at the small creature trembling beside the firelight. A wolf pup. He should have left it. Everyone in Bitterroot said wolves were nothing but trouble. But as the animal's eyes met his, something inside him cracked open. They were the same amber gray as his son's had been. He reached out a weathered hand, hesitating. "You weren't meant to die tonight," he whispered. The pup let out a faint whine and pressed its muzzle against his palm. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a mist that clung low over the valley. The creek had swallowed the old footbridge. Broken branches littered the clearing, and the pines dripped with cold silver rain. Elias stood outside, his breath fogging in the air, and listened to the silence that followed a storm. That fragile, holy quiet that made you believe the world had been washed clean. Inside, Ranger lay curled near the hearth, while the pup, now dry and curious, tottered across the floor, sniffing everything in sight. Elias poured coffee into a chipped mug and watched it with something between disbelief and affection. "You've got spirit," he muttered. "Guess that means you're staying." He thought for a moment, then looked out at the line of willows bent over the creek. Willow, that's what he'd call her. The name seemed to fit. Soft, resilient, bending but never breaking. Later that day, Elias ventured into town for supplies. Bitterroot Hollow was little more than a scattering of weathered storefronts and a gas pump that hadn't worked since the 90s. The bell above the general store door jingled as he entered, and June McAllister, the owner, looked up from the counter with a warm smile. "Well, if it isn't Elias Hartman," she said. "I was starting to think you'd gone feral out there." He offered a rare half-smile. "Not yet." "Storm took down my bridge. Had to restock." June handed him a paper sack. "You look different somehow," she said softly. "Maybe it's the way you're standing, like you're carrying something alive again." He didn't answer, only nodded and paid, slipping back into the gray daylight before the conversation could go any deeper. The trail home felt heavier. The forest had changed. The scent of wet earth, the glimmer of animal tracks in the mud. Somewhere far off, a low howl drifted through the trees, carried on the cold wind. Elias stopped walking. There it was again. Longer this time, deeper. A wolf's call. Ranger's ears pricked up. Willow, wrapped in Elias's jacket, stirred and whimpered softly. Elias scanned the tree line. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping between the pines. Two glinting eyes reflected the dying light, watching. Not hostile, not afraid, just present. When he blinked, they were gone. Night returned quickly in the mountains. Elias built up the fire again, listening to the creek's new voice. Lower now, swollen from the storm. Willow slept near Ranger, tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the old dogs. Elias sat by the window, pipe unlit, staring at the dark forest beyond the glass. He could feel it. Something had shifted. The mountain had noticed him again. He remembered Mara Running Bear's voice from years ago, back when she gave a talk at the ranger station. The wolves of Bitterroot remember everything. Every kindness, every cruelty. They carry memory in their blood he'd scoffed at the time. Now, in the silence of his cabin, with a rescued pup sleeping at his feet and unseen eyes glimmering in the woods, Elias wasn't so sure. Outside, under a sliver of moon, the silver wolf stood at the ridge, motionless, watching the faint light from the cabin window. Around it, shadows moved. The rest of the pack, silent as breath. The alpha turned its head toward the creek, then let out a single low howl that echoed through the valley, a sound not of hunger, but of acknowledgement. Inside, Elias stirred, feeling something deep in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not grief, but a strange, quiet anticipation. He didn't know it yet, but the night he saved the wolf pup was the night the mountain remembered his name. The first snow came early that year, dusting the peaks around Bitterroot Valley in white and muting the forest beneath a hush so deep it felt sacred. The flood was gone, leaving behind broken branches and new scars in the land. For Elias Hartman, the storm had taken something invisible with it, some layer of distance between him and the living world. Now, the old man found himself talking to the pup that followed him from room to room as if she were a person. He named her Willow, after the trees along the creek that bent but never broke under snow or wind. She grew stronger each day, her once weak legs finding balance, her eyes alert and curious. Ranger, his old hound, tolerated her at first, then began to play again, nudging her with his nose and pretending to scold her when she chewed on his tail. Elias would sit by the fire and watch them, his heart warming in ways he didn't want to admit. He started cooking more food than he needed, saving the scraps for the animals. He cleaned the cabin, fixed the roof where the wind had peeled off shingles, and even sang softly to himself. Old songs from another life, back when there had been laughter echoing off these same walls. Still, at night, something stirred in the woods beyond his window. Footprints appeared around the clearing. Large, deep impressions in the snow, too big to belong to Willow. He found them near the edge of the creek, circling the cabin, then vanishing into the timberline. One night he stepped outside with his lantern and stood still in the cold air, listening. The forest was silent except for the faint crackle of ice shifting in the creek. He turned back toward the cabin, then saw them. Two eyes, golden and steady, gleamed from between the trees. Not hostile, not afraid, watching. He could almost feel their weight on him, ancient and calm. "Who's out there?" he called, voice carrying into the pines. No answer, only a low, mournful sound that rolled across the valley, fading into the night. Willow lifted her head and whimpered softly. The next morning, Elias packed a few supplies and headed into town. He told himself he needed salt and coffee, but part of him just wanted to hear another human voice. The road into Bitterroot Hollow wound through hills glazed with frost. Smoke rose from a handful of chimneys. It wasn't much of a town, just a diner, a feed store, a gas pump, and June McAllister's general store with its faded red awning. When Elias stepped inside, a little bell above the door chimed. The familiar smell of pine soap and coffee hit him like a memory. June stood behind the counter sorting mail. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Well, look what the storm dragged in," she teased. "You surviving out there, Elias?" He nodded, setting a small list on the counter. "Barely. Flood took my bridge." Been busy rebuilding. June studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You look different." "Not so hollow," he shrugged. "Got company now." Her eyebrows lifted. "Don't tell me you finally got yourself a woman?" Elias almost laughed. "Not quite. Found a pup, half dead after the storm." "A dog?" "Wolf," he corrected quietly. The room went still for a beat. June's smile faltered. "A wolf?" "You're joking, not joking." She leaned on the counter. "You be careful, Elias. Folks around here don't take kindly to wolves. Hank Dillard's already raising hell about it. Claims they killed 3 of his calves." Elias frowned. That man would shoot the wind if it whistled too loud. June sighed. "Just don't let that pup wander." People get scared easy. He thanked her, took his supplies, and left. Outside, the snow had thickened into lazy flakes that fell in silence. He felt the weight of her warning settle somewhere deep. By the time he returned to the cabin, dusk had turned the valley blue. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, Willow bounded toward him, tail wagging. Ranger barked once, proud of his watch. Elias dropped to his knees, rubbing their heads. "Good dogs," he murmured. "Both of you." That night, while feeding the fire, he noticed something strange. Near the door, in the thin dusting of snow, lay a trout. Fresh, silver-scaled, its gills still wet. He blinked. There were no footprints, just the fish, perfectly placed. He looked out into the dark, but saw only trees. "Who left that?" he whispered. The next morning, another offering appeared. This time a snowshoe hare, clean and whole. Ranger sniffed it, but didn't bark. Willow circled it once and gave a small, approving grunt, as if she understood. Elias shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization forming in his mind. The wolves. They weren't hunting him. They were thanking him. Days passed, and the gifts continued. He found feathers, berries, even a bundle of wild herbs laid neatly beside the porch. He couldn't explain it. Logic told him animals didn't repay kindness. But something older than logic whispered otherwise. One evening, as he chopped wood behind the cabin, a woman's voice startled him. I'd be careful where you pile those logs. You're near a den." He turned, axe still raised. A woman stood by the edge of the clearing, dark hair streaked with silver, wrapped in a heavy wool coat. She carried a field journal and binoculars slung around her neck. "Didn't mean to scare you," she said. "Dr. Mara Running Bear. I'm studying wolf behavior in this valley. Folks in town told me about the man who's been keeping one." Elias lowered the axe. "So word travels fast." "Wolves have a way of drawing attention," she said. Her gaze drifted toward Willow, who peeked out from behind Ranger. "That pup's lucky. Most people would have left her to drown." Elias studied Mara. There was something grounded about her, strong, but not sharp. "She found me more than I found her." Mara nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "They do that sometimes. Wolves remember kindness. There's a Salish teaching. Every good act sends a circle through the world, and one day that circle comes back to you." He grunted softly. "Never seen much evidence of that." "Maybe you're about to," she said, eyes glinting. "You've noticed their gifts, haven't you?" He blinked. "How would you know?" "I've been tracking that pack since spring." "They don't leave offerings for just anyone," she closed her notebook. "If they've chosen you, there's a reason." The two stood in silence, breath clouding in the cold air. The creek murmured softly behind them. Finally, Elias asked, "You think I should be worried?" Mara shook her head. "Not unless you betray their trust." She left soon after, footprints fading into the snow. Elias watched her go, unease and curiosity tangling inside him. That night, as the fire cracked low, he dreamt of his son again, standing on the opposite bank of Bitterroot Creek, hand resting on the head of a silver wolf. The boy smiled and said something Elias couldn't hear over the sound of rushing water. He woke before dawn, heart racing. Willow lay beside him, eyes wide open, staring at the door. Outside, a faint sound echoed through the valley. A howl, long and low, joined by others until the air itself seemed to tremble. Elias rose and looked out the window. There, on the ridge, stood the silver wolf. Snow fell between them, and for an instant he could have sworn it nodded, an acknowledgement, a promise, or maybe a warning. The sound of the pack faded into the wind, but it left behind something that would stay. A feeling that the mountain itself had begun to move closer, as if the forest had decided to remember him. And in that remembering, something vast was about to awaken. The first real winter storm came rolling down from the northern peaks a week later. Snow blanketed Bitterroot Valley in white silence, softening the world until even the river seemed to whisper. Elias Hartman woke before dawn, fed the fire, and stepped out onto the porch. The air burned cold in his lungs. The world glittered, still, untouched. Then he noticed it. Right there, in the middle of the clearing, lay a fish. Not frozen, not scavenged. Fresh. Its silver scales shimmered under the faint blue light. There were no tracks leading to it. No sign of how it got there. He frowned, kneeling. "What in God's name?" Willow padded out beside him, tail flicking. She sniffed the fish once, then looked toward the tree line and gave a short, sharp bark. Ranger stood at the door, ears up, muscles tense. Elias followed Willow's gaze, but there was nothing out there, just a veil of drifting snow. He carried the fish inside and set it by the hearth. "You think this is another one of their tricks?" he muttered. The pup tilted her head as if she knew. By the next morning, a rabbit lay neatly on the porch. The morning after that, a pheasant untouched by teeth or claws. Elias didn't know what to make of it. Wolves didn't behave this way, but the pattern was too deliberate to be chance. He tried to brush it off as superstition, yet something about the rhythm of it, the daily offering, the unseen watchers, stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. His son used to leave him small things when he was a boy. A pine cone, a feather, a trout no bigger than his hand. "Found this for you, Dad," Tommy would say. Now, each time Elias stepped outside, the gifts waiting in the snow whispered that same echo. A few days later, the crunch of tires on frozen ground startled him. He stepped out, rifle slung loosely over his shoulder, to find Dr. Mara Running Bear walking up the trail, her coat dusted with frost, binoculars hanging around her neck. "Morning," she called, her breath fogging. "You keeping warm out here?" He nodded, wary but not unfriendly. "If the stove keeps working, I will." "I was in the area," she said. "Thought I'd check on my favorite hermit." He smirked faintly. "You make a habit of bothering old men, Doctor?" "Only the interesting ones." She smiled, then looked past him at the cabin. "May I?" Elias hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, Willow wagged her tail and sniffed Mara's boots, earning a gentle scratch behind the ears. "She's thriving," Mara said softly. "You've done well with her." Elias poured coffee, handed her a mug, then sat opposite her by the fire. "You said wolves remember kindness," he began. "How much do you believe that?" Mara took a sip before answering. "Enough to spend 15 years studying them. They carry social memory longer than any wild species we know. They mourn their dead. They honor bonds. Sometimes," she glanced toward the window, "they even repay debts." He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Then maybe I've got a debt being repaid. They've been leaving me gifts, fish, rabbits. It's unnatural." "Or sacred," Mara said quietly. Elias snorted. "Sacred's a word I gave up using a long time ago." She met his eyes. "Maybe it hasn't given up on you." They sat in silence for a while, firelight painting the walls in amber. Then Mara reached into her satchel and pulled out a folder. "I wanted to show you something." She opened it to a page of old photographs, wolves marked with tags, GPS data, and field notes written in careful script. "This one," she said, pointing to a photo of a silver-coated wolf with a scar down its neck. "We call it Alpha 9. The locals call it the silver wolf of Bitterroot. I've tracked it for years. It behaves differently, less territorial, more protective near human dwellings." Elias studied the picture. The eyes were familiar, wise, calm, steady. "I've seen it." "Watches the cabin sometimes." Mara hesitated. "That scar, see the pattern? It's not natural. Old wound, maybe from a trap. But what's strange is this." She flipped to another page, an archival report from 15 years earlier. A ranger's note. "Young male found deceased during 2009 landslide rescue. Evidence suggests he freed an injured wolf from a trap before being struck by debris." Elias froze. The edges of the room seemed to blur. "Where did you get that?" "Tribal archives," Mara said softly. "Your son's name wasn't listed, but the timing, the site, it matches your property line." He stared at the paper. His throat felt tight. "You're saying that wolf, the silver wolf, could be the one your boy saved?" Elias's hand trembled. The memories came in fragments. The call from the sheriff, the crushed truck, the empty house afterward, his son's laughter, his wife's humming, then the storm, the silence, the long years of self-imposed exile. Mara reached across the table, her hand resting briefly on his. "You gave life to that pup. Your son gave it to the pack. Maybe they remember outside. The wind rose, snow brushing against the cabin walls like whispers. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire long after Mara left, the folder open on his lap. Willow dozed beside Ranger, paws twitching in dreams. He replayed the years in his mind, the guilt, the loneliness, the feeling that life had taken something it would never return. And now this woman was telling him that the same creatures he once blamed for his suffering might have been the reason his son's kindness still echoed in the valley. He stood, restless, and opened the door. Moonlight silvered the clearing. His breath fogged in the air. A sound broke the silence. A low, resonant howl from somewhere deep in the timberline. Then another joined it, higher, rising and falling like a song older than words. Elias stepped into the snow, boots crunching softly. Willow followed at his heel. The howls multiplied. 5, maybe 6. They moved closer, rolling through the valley, vibrating in his chest. Then, out of the shadows between the pines, the silver wolf emerged. Its coat glowed pale under the moon. Behind it, others waited. Lean shapes, silent, their eyes catching the light. The alpha stepped forward until it stood at the edge of the clearing. Elias held his ground. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the silver wolf lowered its head, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. It turned slightly, revealing the faint scar at its throat, the mark Mara had shown him. Elias's breath caught. He wanted to speak but couldn't. Instead, he nodded once, a gesture that felt both foolish and necessary. The wolf's eyes flicked toward Willow, then back to him. In that quiet, something passed between them, an understanding older than grief, deeper than language. After a few heartbeats, the silver wolf turned and padded back into the trees. The others followed, their shapes dissolving into the dark. Elias stood there long after they were gone. When he finally looked down, Willow was sitting at his feet, staring up at him. "You saw it too," he whispered. "They're not just wild beasts, are they?" The pup gave a small, almost knowing whine. He went back inside, closed the door, and sat once more by the fire. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee mug, not from fear, but from the weight of something dawning inside him. Hope, fragile but alive. When sleep finally came, it was filled with dreams. His son's laughter, a silver wolf running beside him, and the endless white of the mountains under a sky that hummed with memory. Somewhere beyond the ridge, hidden by snow and moonlight, the silver wolf paused in its journey and looked back toward the cabin. It let out a single, quiet howl, low and steady, like a heartbeat, and the sound rolled across Bitterroot Valley, carrying a promise the old man would soon come to understand. The days after that night passed in a haze of quiet awe. Elias Hartman felt as though he were walking through someone else's dream. One painted in soft whites and silver grays, threaded with whispers of things unseen. He couldn't shake the image of the silver wolf's eyes, or the way it had bowed its head before melting into the timberline. Winter deepened. The snow came down thick and steady, wrapping the valley in silence. The old man's days were spent chopping wood, tending the fire, and keeping Willow fed. Yet under the stillness, a strange tension began to stir, like the valley itself was holding its breath. One morning, Mara Running Bear returned, bundled in her fur-lined coat, a satchel slung across her shoulder. Elias met her at the door with a nod. "I didn't expect company," he said, though his tone carried no edge. "You didn't expect wolves bringing you breakfast either," she replied lightly. He smiled faintly and motioned her inside. Willow padded forward, sniffing Mara's boots before curling beside the hearth. Mara set down her satchel and pulled out a map covered in red markings. I've been tracking the silver wolf. Their migration patterns don't make sense. They're not moving south like the other packs. They're circling this valley. Around you, Elias studied the map. Why would they do that? I think you know. He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the photograph Mara had left with him, the one showing the silver wolf, scar glinting along its neck. That mark haunted him more than any nightmare. Mara continued, her voice gentler now. I went through the archives at the tribal office. There's something you should see. She handed him a faded report, dated 15 years earlier. The words blurred before his eyes as he read. Unidentified young male found deceased near Hartman Logging Road. Cause of death? Impact from debris following storm. Evidence of an animal freed from a snare at the site. Elias set the paper down, his hands trembling. That was Tommy. Mara nodded. He saved a pregnant wolf before he died. She lived. That wolf was tagged as Alpha 2, later known as the Silver Wolf. The room fell silent. The fire cracked softly, throwing shadows that seemed to move with the rhythm of Elias's breathing. So the pack, the one that's been leaving the gifts. His voice broke. They're her descendants? They remember, Mara said simply. And they've been protecting you. Maybe because, to them, you're a part of the circle your son began. Elias turned toward the window. Outside, the snow fell steady and soundless. All these years, I blamed the mountain, he whispered. Blamed the storm, the wolves, God. Anyone but myself. And all along, those creatures were the last thing he touched. Mara placed a hand on his arm. Sometimes the mountain takes what it must. Sometimes it gives back what we need. For a long while, neither spoke. The cabin felt warmer than usual, though neither could say why. When Mara finally stood to leave, the sound of an engine cut through the hush. A pickup truck rumbled up the trail, tires crunching through snow. The door slammed, followed by a man's shout. Elias! You in there? It was Hank Dillard, the rancher from down the valley. His voice carried anger, rough and raw. Elias opened the door. What is it, Hank? Hank's face was red with cold and fury. 3 more calves gone last night. Tracks lead straight up here. I told the sheriff those wolves were trouble, and now I find out you're feeding one in your damn cabin. I'm not feeding them, Elias said evenly. They hunt their own. Don't lie to me, Hank snapped. That woman from the university's been stirring things up, saying they're harmless. Harmless? They're killers, Elias. Always have been, Mara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Hank, no one's denying you've had losses, but killing the pack will only make it worse. Disrupt one family, and you'll bring in 10 more hungry wanderers. He shot her a glare. You think I care what your books say? My family's been ranching this land for 60 years. Wolves ain't part of that. Elias's jaw tightened. This valley belonged to them long before it belonged to us. Hank's eyes narrowed. You sound just like your boy did before he died chasing one of those damn things. Maybe you'll end up the same for a heartbeat. Everything froze. The insult hung heavy in the cold air. Elias took a single step forward. His voice dropped to a low growl. You don't speak about my son. Hank looked ready to spit back, but something in Elias's gaze stopped him. He turned abruptly, stomping back toward his truck. You'll regret this, Hartman. Sheriff's already on my side. If those wolves show up again, I'll deal with them myself. The engine roared to life and faded down the trail, leaving tire marks that bled into the snow. Mara exhaled slowly. He won't let it go. We should be careful. Elias nodded, staring out at the tree line. A shadow flickered there, fleeting, almost invisible, as if the wolves had been watching all along. That night, a sharp cry woke him. Not human, not quite animal either. He threw on his coat, grabbed a lantern, and stepped into the bitter wind. The sound came again, from near the ridge. Willow darted ahead, her paws slicing through the snow. When he reached the grove, his stomach dropped. A steel trap lay half-buried, teeth clamped around Willow's front leg. She whimpered, struggling weakly. "Hold still," Elias murmured, kneeling. His fingers fumbled with the mechanism, but the metal was stiff with frost. Blood smeared the snow dark. Damn it! Who would set a trap here? He worked the spring loose, freeing her leg. The pup collapsed against him, panting, trembling. Rage burned hot behind his ribs, not at the wolves, not even at fate, but at Hank Dillard and his blind hate. He carried Willow back to the cabin, wrapped her wound, and sat beside her all night, whispering the same words over and over. "I won't fail you." Not again. By dawn, the snow had stopped. The world was quiet, pale gold under the rising sun. Elias hadn't slept. He brewed coffee, his eyes raw with exhaustion, when Mara knocked softly on the door. "She'll live," Elias said before she could ask. Trap caught her shallow. Mara's face hardened. "Hank's doing." Elias nodded. "He's declared war. And I won't let him win," Mara hesitated. "If this escalates, someone will get hurt. Maybe more than wolves. Then maybe it's time people remember who they share this valley with." She studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "There's going to be a town meeting next week. Sheriff Danner's organizing it. Hank will push for a cull. You should come. Tell your story." Elias looked toward the forest beyond the window. The snow shimmered, untouched. Somewhere in the distance, a low howl rolled through the air, deep, resonant, protective. He turned back to Mara. "Then I'll tell it." All of it. Mara's eyes softened. "Then we'll stand together." As she left, Elias knelt beside Willow, stroking her fur. "You rest now, little one," he whispered. "They'll hear the truth soon enough." Outside on the ridge, the silver wolf watched the cabin through the veil of morning light. It lowered its head, as if in silent promise. The forest held its breath once more, not in fear this time, but in preparation. Something was coming. The mountain, it seemed, was waking up again. The snow melted slowly from the valley floor, turning the paths into veins of mud and runoff. Spring came hesitantly to Bitterroot, sunlight filtering through the pines, the creek alive again with its restless voice. But for all its beauty, the thaw carried tension. Rumors spread across town like dry grass catching fire. Hank Dillard was gathering men, telling anyone who'd listen that the wolves were breeding too close, killing livestock, threatening children. And now, Sheriff Carl Danner had called for a public meeting at the fairground. A hearing, he called it, to decide the wolves' fate. Elias Hartman hadn't set foot in Bitterroot Hollow for months, not since the storm that brought Willow into his life. But as he stood outside his cabin that morning, looking out at the forest shimmering with dew, he knew he couldn't hide anymore. He owed them, the pack, the valley, and the boy he'd lost. Inside, Willow limped around the cabin, her leg nearly healed. Ranger followed her closely, ever watchful. "You'll be fine today," Elias murmured, kneeling to brush her fur. "You're not coming with me, you hear? You stay put." She tilted her head, eyes glinting with confusion, and he almost smiled. "You've done enough saving for one lifetime. Mara Running Bear arrived just after sunrise, her truck rattling up the path. "You sure about this?" she asked when he came out with his coat and hat. "I'm sure," Elias said. "If we stay quiet, Hank wins." "He's already poisoned half the town with his fear." Mara nodded, tightening her gloves. "Then we speak." Together they drove in silence. The valley rolled out below, green returning to the meadows, snow still clinging to the peaks. When they reached the fairground, people were already gathering, ranchers, townsfolk, even a few teenagers curious to see what the fuss was about. Sheriff Danner stood near the podium, hands resting on his belt, his expression unreadable. Hank Dillard was there too, pacing like a man rehearsing his victory. His thick frame filled his worn leather jacket, and his eyes burned with righteous certainty. When he saw Elias, his jaw tightened. "Didn't think you'd show," he muttered as Elias passed. "Wouldn't miss it," Elias said, voice even. The sheriff raised his hands for quiet. "All right, folks. We're here to talk about the wolves up near Bitterroot Creek, reports of livestock attacks, safety concerns, and other matters. We'll hear from both sides. Mr. Dillard, you first." Hank stepped forward, gripping the microphone like it might bite him. "I've lost 7 calves since December," he began, his voice booming. 7. You tell me how long a man's supposed to sit by while wild animals tear his living apart. My grandkids can't even play outside anymore. Those wolves don't belong this close. They're predators, and predators need culling. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. When Hank stepped back, Elias walked to the front, every eye following him. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of years spent silent. He looked at the faces before him, weathered, wary, familiar. "You all know me," he began quietly. "Or you used to. 15 years ago, I lost my wife and son in that landslide up near Bitterroot Creek. After that, I stopped coming into town. Figured I didn't have much left to say." A stillness settled over the crowd. Even Hank's scowl faltered. "But a few months ago," Elias continued, "a storm like that one hit again. I found a wolf pup trapped in the flood. I could have left it. God knows I thought about it. But I didn't. And because of that choice, something started to change." He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. "Those wolves you're so afraid of, they've never once threatened me. They watch my cabin. They bring me food. They protect what's theirs, and somehow what's mine. They remember. The old stories talk about the great circle, kindness that returns in ways we can't understand. My son died saving a wolf, and I believe the pack he saved still carries that memory. Maybe that's crazy to some of you, but I've seen it. I've lived it." Mara stepped forward then, placing a stack of papers on the podium. "The wolves of Bitterroot are a stabilized pack," she said. "They prevent other, more aggressive packs from moving in. Kill them, and you'll create the chaos you claim to fear. These animals have adapted to us. They're part of the valley's balance, and what's more, we're part of theirs." For a moment, no one spoke. The crowd shifted uneasily. Then Hank barked out a bitter laugh. "Pretty speeches. But talk don't bring back dead cattle. You can worship your beasts all you want, but when one of them kills something that's mine, I'll do what needs doing." He turned toward the edge of the crowd, where his men stood, rifles half hidden beneath their coats. The sheriff noticed, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Easy, Hank," Danner warned. But then it happened. A ripple of sound that froze everyone. A single distant howl rolled down from the ridge, low and haunting. Heads turned toward the forest. Another answered it, then another. Within moments, the air itself seemed to tremble with the chorus. People murmured. "They're here," someone whispered. Elias stepped off the podium, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the fairground. From the shadows, shapes emerged, not threatening, but purposeful. The silver wolf led them, tall and radiant under the gray sky. Behind it came the rest of the pack, moving as one, silent except for the crunch of their paws on thawed earth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hank's men raised their rifles, but Danner shouted, "Hold your fire!" The wolves stopped at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, no one dared breathe. Then Willow appeared, limping, small beside the silver wolf, but proud. She stepped forward and stood between Elias and the crowd. Children clutched their mothers. Even Hank faltered. The silver wolf looked directly at Elias, then at the people. It didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it lowered its head, calm and steady. A small voice broke the silence. June McAllister's granddaughter, no more than 7, slipped free from the crowd and walked forward, her pink boots sinking into the mud. "Don't!" June hissed, but the child kept going. She stopped in front of Willow and reached out her hand. The pup sniffed, then licked her fingers. The crowd gasped again, but this time it was different, softer, awed. Elias felt something break open inside him. He looked at Hank, whose face had gone pale. "You see?" Elias said quietly. "They're not the enemy." Fear as Hank stared for a long moment. Then he lowered his rifle. One by one, the others did the same. Sheriff Danner stepped forward. "Nobody's shooting anything today." "That's an order." The silver wolf turned, giving one last look at Elias. An acknowledgement. A farewell. Then, with a flick of its tail, it led the pack back toward the trees. The sound of their movement faded until there was only the wind, the child's quiet laughter, and the heartbeat of the valley returning to calm. Mara touched Elias's arm. "You did it." He shook his head. "No, they did." The sheriff approached, expression unreadable. "Guess we've all got something to think about," he said, before walking off to disperse the crowd. As the people drifted away, Elias looked toward the ridge, where the last trace of silver disappeared among the trees. For the first time in 15 years, he felt peace. Not the hollow kind that comes from silence, but the living kind that grows from forgiveness. He turned to Mara. "I think it's time to start something new," he said. She smiled. "What did you have in mind?" He looked back at the forest, the creek gleaming below it, and felt the faintest pull of purpose. "A place where people can learn to see what I've seen. Where kindness and wildness aren't enemies." Mara's smile widened. "Then let's build it." And as the sun broke through the clouds, warming the wet earth, Elias thought he could almost hear the silver wolf's howl carried on the breeze. Not a warning this time, but a promise. A beginning. Summer returned to Bitterroot Valley with a gentleness it hadn't known in years. The mountains glowed gold in the evenings, and the creek, once a roaring beast that had nearly taken Elias's life, now ran clear and calm beneath the willows. The valley seemed quieter somehow, less wary, more at peace. And for the first time in 15 years, Elias Hartman felt that same peace inside himself. He stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, the one he'd shared for so long with only ghosts and silence. Now it was alive again. Wind chimes whispering against the eaves, the scent of coffee and pine smoke curling together. Ranger was gone, buried under the old willow tree near the creek, but his collar hung on a nail by the door, a small token of loyalty that time couldn't erase. Willow, grown sleek and strong, patrolled the edge of the clearing each morning before vanishing into the trees to rejoin her kind. Sometimes she returned for a night, curling beside the fire, her yellow eyes reflecting the flames. She always left before dawn, melting back into the forest without a sound. Elias didn't stop her anymore. He understood now that she wasn't his to keep. She was part of something older and larger than his grief, a circle that began long before him and would continue long after. The townsfolk had changed too. After the meeting, Sheriff Danner put an end to trapping in the valley. Hank Dillard rebuilt his fences, and though he never apologized outright, he stopped talking about killing wolves. He'd seen something that day at the fairground that no argument could undo. Sometimes, when Elias passed him in town, Hank would give a short nod, like a man acknowledging a truth he didn't have the words to name. Elias and Mara Running Bear kept their promise. Together they started the Willow Project, a small sanctuary on the edge of the valley, half refuge, half learning center. It was nothing grand, just a weathered barn, a handful of enclosures for injured wildlife, and a visitor's lodge built from reclaimed timber. But people came, schoolchildren, hikers, even ranchers who wanted to understand what they once feared. Mara handled the science, tracking data, teaching ecology, and Elias handled the stories. He spoke to the visitors in his slow, gravelly voice, telling them how kindness moves through the world like water, unseen, patient, but powerful enough to carve through stone. Sometimes, when he spoke, he could feel the eyes of his son on him, Tommy, the boy who had loved this land before he even knew what it meant to lose it. One evening, months after the project began, Elias walked down to the creek alone. The air smelled of wild mint and rain-soaked earth. The sun was dipping behind the peaks, staining the sky in streaks of rose and amber. At the base of the willow tree, a small stone marker caught the light. He knelt beside it and brushed away a few leaves. 2 names were carved there now, Tommy Hartman and Ranger. Beneath them, he'd added a single line, "Kindness is remembered." He set down a weathered bracelet, a simple leather band with a silver charm shaped like a wolf's paw. Mara had found it during one of her surveys, half buried in the soil near the old landslide site. They both knew whose it had been. Elias lingered, the sound of the creek steady and familiar. He spoke softly, as if to the air itself. "You were right, son." They remembered a low rustle made him look up. Willow stood a few yards away, her coat gleaming silver in the fading light. Behind her, half shrouded by the trees, stood the silver wolf. Older now, its muzzle touched with white but still regal. Around them, the rest of the pack waited in silence. Elias rose slowly. For a moment, no one moved. The old man and the wolves regarded one another in the amber dusk. Then Willow stepped forward, carrying something in her jaws. She dropped it at his feet, a sprig of wild mountain sage, fragrant and green. Elias bent down, his throat tight. "You brought me a gift again," he murmured. "Old habits die hard, huh?" The silver wolf gave a low, throaty sound, neither growl nor bark, more like a sigh of wind through the trees. Then, one by one, the pack turned and began to move up the slope, their bodies gliding through the tall grass like ghosts made of light. Willow was the last to go. She paused, looked back at him, and for a heartbeat, Elias saw his son's smile reflected in her eyes. Then she was gone. He stood there until the stars began to bloom across the sky, until the crickets replaced the creek's murmur. When he finally turned back toward the cabin, the valley no longer felt empty. It felt full of life, of memory, of everything he'd once thought he'd lost. Weeks later, Mara found him sitting on the porch at sunrise, sipping coffee, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Quiet's not the same as lonely," he answered. "I used to think silence was punishment. Now it just feels like peace." She sat beside him, pulling her coat tighter. "Do you think they'll come back?" He gazed out at the line of willows swaying gently in the breeze. "They already have. Every dawn, I hear them, sometimes far, sometimes near. The mountain remembers its own." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need words. The creek glimmered below them, catching the morning light. Somewhere up in the ridge, faint but unmistakable, a long, rolling howl rose through the valley, steady, full of life. Mara smiled. "You ever think maybe that's his way of saying thank you?" Elias nodded. "No, that's his way of saying you're welcome." They both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the wind and the call of the wolves. As the sun climbed higher, Elias stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The world before him shimmered with promise. The green slopes, the shining creek, the sanctuary buildings nestled below. He could almost see the path that stretched beyond it all, winding through the forest and up toward the mountains, toward everything still waiting to be discovered. The circle was complete now. What began with loss had ended with understanding. What once had been a wound was now a scar, permanent, yes, but proof of healing. Elias took a deep breath, the air cool and clean. Somewhere far off, a wolf answered another's call, the sound rising and falling like a hymn. He smiled and whispered, "Run free, my friends." The wind carried the words away, threading them through the willows, across the creek, and up into the mountains. For a long time he stood there, feeling the rhythm of the earth beneath his feet and the warmth of the sun on his face. And when he finally went inside, closing the door behind him, the valley outside glowed with light, the kind that only comes after a long, forgiving dawn. The circle never ended. It had only come home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.